Welcome to Needham School Spotlight. I'm Dan Goody-Kanst, Superintendent of Schools. Recently, the Needham Schools conducted an equity audit so that we could learn more about our educational programs and practices in the Needham Schools. The equity audit has challenged us to really think deeply about some of our procedures, some of our educational programs, and opportunities in the Needham Schools. Joining me today to unpack the equity audit and talk a little bit about next steps are some key administrators, and I'd like to welcome Mary Lammy, our Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services, Jamie Singelays, our English Language Learner, or ELL Coordinator, Johnny Cole, who's an Assistant Principal at the high school, and Dr. Joanne Allen Willoughby, who is our METCO Director. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, first of all, just so the community has a general understanding, what, Mary, do we mean when we say we conducted an equity audit?
Sure. Well, I mean, for as long as I can remember, our focus in Needham, and certainly we're not alone, is being sure that we're providing inclusive and equitable practices for all of our students and their families and our staff, quite frankly. An equity audit is really meant to look at through the lens of equity and inclusion. Particularly for us, we were interested in the issues as well as the promising practices around race, racial biases, how we encounter those and how we move forward from those issues. And what we were looking for in an equity audit is someone to come in with an objective lens to help us to really understand, the efforts that we're making around practices, programs, services, et cetera. What are those practices? What are promising? What could we learn from? What can we build off of? What might we not be doing yet that we could be bringing into the district to improve the way that we are approaching equity and inclusion? We were looking for the audit to include a pretty intensive data review, looking at our achievement information on students as well as discipline information, attendance, anything that could really help us to get a full picture of how our students are doing. We also wanted to be sure that all voices were heard across the community. So we wanted to be sure that staff, families, students had the opportunity to engage in the equity audit in order to share their own experiences and their lens on what is working well and where they might feel that we need to prioritize and improve.
I should add that the consultant ultimately, and I think a few of us around the table were very much involved in trying to vet several folks who came in last spring, and Mrs. Christine Robinson, who's worked with several nonprofits in thinking about diversity and inclusion, and more recently with the Kresge Foundation. She was the consultant who's been working with us since last July to kind of help guide us in our work. Joanne, Mary's mentioning that some folks were part of the data collection. What does she mean? Who was involved in this?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why this information and the results of this audit are so powerful is because we heard from so many different voices. We heard from staff, we heard from administrators, we heard from teachers, we heard from families, we heard from students. And there was a real effort on Christine's part to really tap into all aspects of our community. We made special efforts to have meetings not only in Needham but also in Boston so that we could include Boston resident families and make sure that all voices were heard. She did some really great work with not only our high schoolers but our middle school students and really getting a sense of how students feel they are impacted by issues of race. And that is really important in terms of the program, not only the programming, that we do, but really who are we as a community to really get a sense of we are not monolithic. We have a very diverse community, I think more diverse than we actually think about on a daily basis, which is important for us to think about and talk about. And as we move forward in our programming and looking at the results of the equity audit, to really keep in mind who we are as a community and build on that strength.
One of the things you just said is something that it's important to, I don't want to say remind the community, but let the community know. When I started in Needham 12 years ago, look at our entire student body and enrollment, we were about 8% students of color. Now it's about 20%, a little over 20%.
right.
So you're right, the community has changed, and the student body has changed, and it's not just with race. Obviously, it's with language and culture and a variety of things. Johnny and Jamie, as you have interacted with the equity audit and as you have read the initial findings, what struck you about what you learned about the experience here in Needham?
One of the things that I appreciated when we were looking at Christine as a consultant was the sensibility she brought around intersectionality to the work, looking at the way that our different identities intersect with one another. And while that we had a big focus on race, as Mary was talking about, I was really intrigued by the way that she brought in all the various elements of identity that are impacted by this equity work. The number of languages spoken by families in Needham was surprising. The other thing that I am constantly trying to remind myself when I revisit the work that's come out of the equity audit is just that we always need to remember that this is a both-and situation, that there are multiple realities that can coexist, and for some people, a lot of the sort of troubling aspects of what people are saying is not sitting well with them because they're grappling with it for the first time, and then we have to remember that for many folks, that has been their reality for many years, and so that both of those things can coexist, that we can be a welcoming and inclusive environment and have a lot of programs to promote equity, and it can still be a difficult place for some students to go to school here, and we're working to fix that.
I think looking at the results, I frankly was a little bit disappointed and embarrassed because I don't think it really matches who we are individually. Like when I work with teachers, that's not what I see. So I think that this information that Christine has kind of pulled from the community is also energizing because I know that's not who we are individually, so how are the little decisions that we make every day adding up to that experience for students? So there must be things that we're doing that we don't realize we're doing or that we could take a closer look at to find how do we add up to that experience for students and what can we change to move away from that, to make sure that everyone is having that positive experience.
I want to pick up just a little bit on, you said you were embarrassed. What embarrassed you?
I think, some of the data around like discipline disparities or just how students are feeling, or the thing that was most embarrassing maybe was the silence that really stood out to me, that a lot of people reported, that they had heard things said in hallways or wherever and no one intervened. No teacher, no adult said anything. And I think that's one of those little things that I think teachers are making decisions and other staff every day about, do I insert myself into this conversation? Like what action should I take? And I think those are things that can make a big difference for students. So I think the silence was the thing that was most disappointing to me.
One of the comments of a teacher, actually a few teachers, I hear something that may happen on the playground or in the classroom. I'm not sure what to do, so I shut it down. I avoid the conversation. And teachers actually are asking for, and most recently I had a conversation with a teacher this week, wanting some tools for how to address something that may come up. They're looking for it, not really trying to avoid it, just not sure exactly what to do, which I think is critically important for us to know. That's work that we have to provide. Those are skills and opportunities we have to provide for our staff.
Right.
Johnny, just say just a little bit more about the intersectionality. So one of the things Christine did when she came in and conducted the audit, she certainly helped me understand. What brought us to the table, by the way, was we were looking at disparities or inequities with race and issues of racism and perhaps an imbalance in how students are being treated. She made us think generally about equity, and that it isn't just this one thing you can look at, but there are other pieces to it. Talk a little bit about that.
I think what is helpful in thinking about the intersectionality is even when you're thinking about a single identity, is to keep it, for everyone to keep in mind that we are all part of a larger cultural group, whatever identity box we check, and we are also individuals. So keeping that in mind in terms of the intersectionality of all those identities, that can be really challenging. And I think that is the work that that we need to continue to do with our staff and with ourselves and our students to make sure that we are seeing students as individuals and being aware of the many aspects of their identity that come with a larger cultural landscape, and that a student who is African American and whose parents immigrated here from a different country and who might identify as LGBT has a much different identity than a student who only has 2 of those 3 markers or 1 of those 3 markers.
And what it means to allow a student to bring their whole self, or a staff member to bring their whole self to a community and feel comfortable in doing that. I think what this report has done is has opened our eyes to the fact that we need to be thoughtful about that, and we need to allow and give our staff and our students space to be their full selves in our community.
And to really check in on our own biases.
Right.
You know, where I think the conversations we've been able to have since the information has come in from the audit is moving, yes, the conversations can be uncomfortable, but moving through that discomfort to really take a look inward around the biases that you unintentionally or intentionally bring forward as a teacher or as a leader or whomever you might be. That's the starting point to really begin to make change. And as Jamie was saying, it's how can we make those incremental changes that in the end will have a large impact on how our students are feeling and what we're able to do to support their learning.
By the way, I should say that the final report is now available. We've posted it online on the district's website, and it will go as an information item to the school committee, and we'll use this document to help guide some of our work, which we'll talk about in a bit. But
Yeah.
what surprised you? What did you learn from it?
Honestly, I didn't feel surprised by it. I felt hopeful that we as a community were willing to look at ourselves and willing to talk about and address some of these issues. Some of the things Johnny was saying earlier, we all are individuals in this community, and we all walk through this community differently and have different experiences in this community. So as an African American woman, I wasn't surprised by the findings. What I think is interesting, what I do find surprising is that some of my colleagues didn't find it surprising.
Okay.
And I think that's the work.
So say more about that. Some of your colleagues didn't find it surprising.
Well,
Why?
not only my colleagues, I think that the community, some of the words I heard where people were shocked, people were upset by this. And it says to me that they didn't realize that this was going on. And from my perspective, who walk through it every single day and have these experiences every day, it is a little surprising that they are surprised by this. So what work do we need to do so that even though we will always walk through the world a little differently, that we can respect and recognize each other's difference and each other's different experiences, and try to work to understand people's different perspectives as we make decisions and as we make policy.
What surprised you about the report?
I've been in Needham for just about 10 years now, and from day one, I was always impressed with the kind of work the district has been engaged in around cultural proficiency, equity, and inclusion. And so I think my initial reaction was, we're doing a lot of really great work around unpacking our own understanding and how that links to our actions and the way that we engage with each other and reach and teach our students. What I've learned is to not dismiss the work that we have done as if it didn't have an impact, or it didn't perhaps have an effect. But we're at a place now where we understand, the best way I can say it is, we've got to move from theory to action. The kind of professional learning that we would like to move forward with in this district is more about, like you were saying earlier, Dan, what are the tools and strategies that we can help provide to each other and to our teachers so that they feel more equipped to handle situations when they arise, difficult conversations when they do emerge, the classroom is the best place to engage in the work around equity and inclusion. And so it's sort, for me, because we've been engaged for a while now with the information, I'm past the initial surprise and in a place where I'm understanding why that was surprising and where we need to be in order to make the improvements.
It has kind of set with us for a little while, and as Joanne suggested, well, some have been living with this and experiencing it. In the event our folks who are listening to this conversation aren't sure about some of the specifics, these are some things that I'm disappointed that students had these experiences in the Needham schools. I just want to read some of the quotes that some of our students expressed as part of this. Or their parents, when questioned. You can't be a princess if you are brown. Brown is bad, ugly, scary, smelly, poor. Don't touch me if you are brown. Only people with yellow hair can be a princess. All Latinos are from Mexico. They can't speak English. Go work in a field. This is just some of some direct quotes that the few hundred students, staff, parents, and community members, as they talked about inequities and their experiences, shared. And they're pretty striking. They certainly they touched a chord with me. I'm not naive. I know things go on. I'd like to think that in this community and after the work we've done that we have made some progress, but it's clear that there's more work that has to be done.
For sure.
I think, can I just say, in terms of the surprising piece that goes along with that, I think I don't want to say I was surprised, but I was reminded that that what you were saying about a lot of staff saying that they needed the tools and they needed more PD or more experiences with how to address these things. I was reminded that we have done a lot of that work, and I think that when we get to a certain point, it's like working with students, you have to take the training wheels off at some point. And I think what we have had the experience here at the high school with the graffiti last December and November and the walkout that students led in December, we got to the point with staff where I remember I stood in front of the staff and said, we've been talking about this for as long as I've been here, and I've only been here 3 years, and you may not be comfortable, but you're ready. You're ready to have these conversations, and the way to get more comfortable is just to continue to have those conversations and push yourself. And so I think that's a little bit of what I've been thinking about, a shift in our work with our staff and with our families and with our students. I think they are ready. They just they need to be pushed a little bit. We all need to be pushed a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also interesting, the work Johnny mentioned that we're doing here at the high school, but also at the middle school level. We had a think-in when students, again, had some issues around graffiti on the walls. And one of the things that I found really hopeful was the number of white Needham students that stood up and said, this is not okay. Yep. These are our friends, this is our community, and we can't allow this to happen. So we do have students that, even though we have students that are making comments like this, we also have students that are ready to stand up and say enough. And what are we going to do as young people to really make some impact on our community for the better?
I think also you're saying that the teachers, to go back to them, have the tools to do this, and we just need to kind of let them do that. I think also giving them permission. I think there's a large focus on curriculum and having to teach certain things, and teachers are feeling a lot of pressure to make sure they're getting through all the academic learning that students need to do. And I think kind of weaving in the importance of this, and if you have to take a block to do this work instead of teach a math lesson, you have to do it. Because that's maybe something that teachers need to shift their mindset a little bit, or feel like we give them permission to do that.
If you're in a classroom and you're not feeling safe, you are not going to engage in the learning activity. So as a teacher, you can push through and let the silence sit and push it aside and stick to the lesson plan that you had in place. but you now have at least one student in your class that is completely not engaged in the learning process.
Well, in the audit, Christine does talk about this. She talks about the psychological toll and ultimately the physical toll for students who are experiencing the micro-macroaggressions, and I may have you, Johnny, any one of you define those for the audience for us in a moment, but that there is this cumulative effect of those students who feel shut down or unsafe, or they hear these comments and they put on a brave face, they keep reading the book, they keep showing up on the team and getting on the bus and coming to school, but there's this effect that I never really thought about before. I thought, well, we'll discipline the student, we'll move on. We all move on. The audit really taught me that there's this pile-on effect that is insidious and subtle and nuanced, but it's there. Microaggressions, macroaggressions, that comes up a lot in the report. What's the quick definition?
Yeah, I think the macroaggressions are more of those bigger acts of racism and other isms that we're taught from a very early age, and the microaggressions are the sort of death by 1,000 paper cuts. The small comments that are made now and then that for example, being an assistant principal at the high school, I end up dealing with some discipline issues, and a student gets sent out of class, ends up in my office, and often, the thing that the kid got asked to leave the class for is not actually the problem, right? There were like 10, 12 things that were before it that had nothing to do with the teacher or the student that they had a negative interaction with. There were comments being made throughout the day, so asking a black person if I can touch your hair, or asking a person that has some vague ethnicity about them, what are you, instead of finding a polite way to ask about their background. That those are the things that do add up and really start to take a toll.
Yeah. And it's that conversation, stepping into it, taking off the training wheels, that it's like, I think in need, we're ready to do that. Although I think it may mean that we'll sometimes fall over and make a mistake.
Absolutely.
So talk about that.
Yeah.
What happens if you make a mistake? I mean, people are going to say things or misstep. What do we do about that?
I mean, that's really comes back to the community that we've built and that we work on every day. And that in the classroom level, it's what has the teacher done with the community of learners in that class to create a safe space. We talk a lot about growth mindset in academics and learning from mistakes in math and English and social studies and science and all the subjects we teach. And we have to have the same mindset about conversations about difference and identity. So one of the things that I know we have tried to do at the high school is make sure our staff know that they have permission to say, I don't know. They have permission to say, I'm not really sure why I feel uncomfortable with what just happened, and I'm going to take some time to think about it, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow. And then
go get the resources.
And then go get the resources, talk to a colleague, and modeling that for students is really, really important, I think. I think that I was in school in the 80s, and the education mindset at the time was the teacher is the one with all the answers, and there wasn't a lot of student-centered learning in my experiences in California education. And I think that we've come a long way. It's 2018, and we know that students learn best when they're really involved in that learning, and the teachers are modeling all the ways you can learn, and saying I don't know and going to find the answers from someone that does. One way to do that.
So I want us to talk about next steps for a moment as we wind down here. I'm reminded, though, as each one of you is speaking, that we don't, in the comments, the quotes that I read, we are not teaching that in the Needham Public Schools. We are a reflection. The Needham Public Schools is a reflection of the community. And we have all these, beautiful children coming to us from 5,500, 5,600 students from Boston and Needham who come to our schools every day to learn and to interact and grow together. And they come from a variety of different families and communities. 47 different languages spoken from families in Needham. So we have all these different cultures and values coming together under the roofs of our 8 buildings. And so things happen. So we have to take on this work, but we cannot be completely responsible for everything that happens. But we can lead the way, I think, in a way. I know the school committee at our meeting last night are asking us about the equity audit, next steps, where are we going. So this is on their agenda in a big way as representatives of the community. I do want to talk about next steps and ask about what we do. So we have all found ourselves, along with some of our colleagues, on a coalition that we're calling the Race Equity Access Leadership Coalition, the REAL Coalition, to help unpack the equity audit and talk about next steps. Joanne, what do you think, what are next steps for the Real Coalition? What do we need to do as we interact with the community and our teachers?
Well, I think that's something that we're continuing to talk about. We started as a small committee with some of the people around this table. In addition is Shakur Abdul-Halik, Jessica Downey, Tom Denton, anyone else I'm leaving off?
I think that's it right now.
I think that's it. And one of the things that we as a coalition have talked about is how do we expand that? Who do we need to include in that? We're looking to include parents, students, other staff members, but we're also looking at how do we do this so that we can look at the areas that we need to look at as a community, looking at our curriculum, looking at our professional development, looking at specific areas, and maybe having subcommittees that look at those areas and report back to the larger community. The other thing that we've talked about is how do we get this information out to the greater community. I think we're doing a lot of work, a lot of great work like Mary and Johnny were talking about, but how do we let everybody know? This is important not only for our students, our staff, but we have to engage everyone. I mean, I think that's one of the big pieces that we will be working on.
I think engaging the community now is the next step in the work. Once we have kind of let the equity audits sink in and we can be more strategic and planful, I hope that we will be able to, the Real Coalition, as it broadens its base, think about a strategy that will address certain topics over the next few years and be very specific and strategic about it in year 1, year 2, year 3, so that we can kind of, as you suggest, we're taking off the training wheels, doing some learning and working together here. It will be important to engage with the community. I know the community and our parents and teachers are really very, very much interested. So I'm thinking here that as this work is important, it's timely, and by the way, it takes place within a national context of a lot of noise and frankly some ugliness that's going on nationally in the conversation about race and equity, and that's troubling, but that we can kind of control our own work and our own destiny. So the challenges that the Needham Schools has is to make sure that we are providing for an inclusive education for all of our kids. I'm hearing that. We have some challenges that exist with racial equity in the Needham Schools, and we need to address them head on and talk about them. I'm happy that the Race, Equity, Access, and Leadership Coalition, the Real Coalition, is formed. We'll be looking for membership from parents and students and other staff so that we can take this work beyond the schools and into the community so that we can have a real impact. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I look forward, we'll come back again and talk about our work and how we're doing.
Sounds
okay?
good.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.